All right, guys, we're starting on chapter 1. I did start this series on chapter 10, but we're going to be starting back on chapter 1 and making up all the other chapters through the week. And I will be taking my exam after this week, probably. So let's just get into it. So, introduction to psychology. What is psychology? Psychology is a scientific study of the mind, behavior, background modification of work. Credit top left modification work by the U.S. law. Credit top left modification. Yeah, so this is just a lot of the credits you'll see. But introduction to psychology. What is psychology? Psychology is a pretty broad range. It's a broad spectrum of things. Psychology pretty much focuses on the cognition, the ideation, and a lot of the impairments and the natural tendencies that humans have, and the natural things that we do, and the natural things that we're supposed to do as humans. So I'd say psychology is mainly just a branch based on psyche, based on the mind. And we dive into the mind a lot during psychology, and we talk about a lot of the normal neural things that goes on in psychology. But in the next chapter, we will be covering biopsychology. So we'll see things on the structural psychology and things of the sort. So, what is psychology? This was a painting by Antonia Canova's sculpture and depicts arrows in the psyche. So, this was obviously, what's it called? Why can't I think of it right now? I want to say German. This was Greek. Arrows, Greek, and psyche. Psyche was the mind. This was pretty much capturing how they depicted the mind then. I can't really tell much about this from the top of my head. But, so psyche was a soulology is a scientific study. Psychology, the scientific study of mind and behavior. Or the psyche was a soul, and the scientific, and ology was a scientific study. Yeah, we named psychology scientific study of mind and behavior. So psyche was actually proposed by Carl Jung. He made psyche the mind. He phrased that, or he derived psyche from the mind. He said the psyche is pretty much interchangeable with the mind. So psychologists study everything about the human experience from basic workings of human brains to consciousness, memory, language, reasoning, and personality and mental health. So psychological perspective structuralism, understanding the conscious experience through introspection. William Wundt. So William Wundt is obviously the father of psychology. He wanted to understand the experience and the mind through how it's structured, and how the structure has something to do with how the mind develops. Functionalism was focused on the mental activities that helped an organism adapt to the environment. So what functions did we have? What homeostatic functions do we have that caused us to gain this adaptation or this neuroplasticity that made us realize it and that made us adapt to our environment? Psychoanalytic theory was focused on the role of the unconscious and affection conscious behavior. This was proposed by Sigmund Freud. If you watch the chapters before this chapter, before I uploaded this first one, you'd know that we covered psychodynamics and psychoanalytical theories in chapter 15 and chapter 16. And chapters before that, honestly, psychoanalysis is a really prominent thing, and it's really important. It was one of the really emphasized therapeutic methods when it came out. So Gestalt psychology, which is basically the psychology of the whole, and it focuses on the humans as a whole rather than the individual parts. So this was mainly trying to focus on not just parts of the human, more like a whole therapeutic measure to bring the person back cohesively and aggregatedly. We're going to fix the entire person. We're not just going to fix one part. Maybe they have maybe there's maybe they have substance abuse. Okay, they have substance abuse. We can fix the substance abuse, but we also need to fix the psychological trauma, maybe the disorder that they obtain, because there's a lot of disorders that have a lot of comorbidity with substance use. So maybe we need to find the substance, or maybe we need to find the disorder that has been conflated with the substance abuse, or what's causing the substance abuse. Is it stress? Is it work overload? Is it too much work? What's the cause of him even using the substance in the first place, and what's the cause of, how are we going to fix a disorder, things like that. So behaviorism focuses on observing and controlling behavior. So this was by Pavlov, Watson, and Skinner. Behaviorism, actually, Watson thought that a baby was born a blank slate, and you could pretty much, I don't want to say manipulate, but kind of guide how that baby is going to turn out in the future. If they're going to be a lawyer, if they're going to be a neuroscientist, if they're going to be a psychologist, if they're going to be a doctor, you never know. Humanism emphasized the potential of good that is innate in humans. So humanism was proposed by Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. We did cover something called Roger and Therapy as well in the 16th chapter, which focused on just doing things for the greater good of the client, emphasizing a lot of things for the client, and just being overall empathetic and just being a good person to the client. This is something maybe the client didn't experience in their maybe in their contemporary experiences, or maybe in their past. Yeah, so but basically humanism was the thought that humans have this innate sense of goodness, and maybe we just need to fix the bad cognitive thought inside of them, or the bad behavior inside of them, to make them think like a good, normal person. Every human has this virtuous nature, is basically what this is saying. There's always a super ego in somebody. So William Wundt was the proposer of structuralism, like I was saying before. William Wundt is credited as one of the founders of psychology. He created the first laboratory for psychology research. Wundt emphasized structuralism. He focused on understanding the structure and characteristics of the mind through introspection. Introspection was a process of examining someone's conscious experience in an attempt to break it into its component parts. So introspection is mainly like looking at a lot of the visceral things, like the things inside of the person. Looking at, like, they wanted to look inside of someone's consciousness and break it apart, is what William Wundt is proposing right now. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Next is William James, who proposed functionalism. William James, shown here, is a self-portrait. He was the first American psychologist. James drew the functionality of cognitive processes, establishing functionalism. Functionalism emphasizes how mental activities contribute to basic environmental survival. So we covered a lot of things that are encompassing functionality and functionalism, which is a lot of the things that a lot of this was covered in our motivation chapter, where we emphasized what motivates a human to do something. And there's things proposed such as drive theory, which was a theory that there's homeostatic drives that drives us to do something. Maybe there could be a more like a secondary thing to achieve that first primary physiological function that we want, to retain that homeostatic stability, which is maybe something like obtaining money so we can achieve our Maslow hierarchy of needs, which Maslow hierarchy of needs was this. You'll learn a lot of what I'm talking about in next chapters if you watch my videos. So I'm just kind of introducing the names of these things to you so you can encode that into your mind, and then so you can watch and learn what the heck I'm talking about. So, but the Maslow hierarchy, on the bottom, there is this physiological function that humans need, our physiological functions first, and everything else needs to be achieved after. But William James functionalism, I'd say he would emphasize a lot of our drives and motives, a lot of our primary drives and motives for functionalism and our homeostatic properties. So next we have Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was a highly influential figure in the history of psychology. One of his many books, A General Introduction to Psychoanalysis, shared his ideas about psychoanalytical theory and published in 1922. So I never read the book, but I suppose that it's really interesting. Diving into someone's unconscious dreams, and also diving into a lot of the past things that have built them brick by brick. I think that'd be pretty interesting. So psychoanalytical theory founded that psychoanalytical theory was a perspective in which domesticated clinical psychology for many decades, studied hysteria and neurosis, theorized that many of his patients' problems arose from the unconscious mind, and he believed that one way the unconscious mind could be assessed was through dream analysis. Psychoanalytical theory focused on the roles of a person's unconscious and early childhood experiences. So what this is saying is that basically Sigmund Freud wanted to focus and emphasize a lot of the things that we saw in dreams. There's also things called like the ink blot test, which a lot of psychologists thought that the ink blot test proposed a lot of the things that was going on in your mind from what you depicted from a picture. In dream analysis, maybe there's something going on in your dream, and maybe the psychologist or the psychoanalyst could grasp what was in your dream and realize maybe a lot of the unconscious repressed thoughts that you had undergoing in your psyche. So yeah, that's pretty much it. But next is the Gestalt psychology, which is Koellefer, Kafka, and Wertheimer. Excuse me if I don't say this. They're German psychologists, so I probably won't say their name right. They're German psychologists who immigrated to the U.S. to escape from Nazi Germany. Gestalt, which means whole, based on the idea, although a sensory experience can be broken down into individual parts, how those parts relate to each other as a whole, and what an individual responds to in perception. Ideas of Gestalt continue to influence research on sensation and perception. So we covered a lot of the sensory, a lot of this unit, Gestalt psychology. We had a biopsychology unit which focused on a lot of the perceptions and senses that we naturally have, and also episodic memory. Episodic memory is a lot of the senses that can give us some sort of compact memory that actually makes us remember a lot of the senses and a lot of the things that happen at that current moment. We call episodic memory when, where, what. For when, what time was it? Obviously, your circadian rhythm, and maybe a lot of the organs or the glands in your brain are going to be understanding what time it was. Where, obviously, that's with your visual cortex and your visual properties. We covered that with the optic chiasm and the binocular views and things of this sort. And what? So what happened? Obviously, if we're encoding what happened, you're going to be using your hearing to encode something. You're going to be encoding your muscle movements. Most likely, you're going to be encoding the things that you saw visually, because our eyes are going to be one of the most important sensory things, or important sensory items or aspects of our being. So yeah, that's pretty much just our psychology. And next we have Ivan Pavlov, which was focused on classical conditioning, which classical conditioning is really important. Ivan Pavlov, obviously this was a person who elicited a conditioned response from a neutral stimulus. So unconditioned stimulus, which is going to be food, which in an unconditioned response, obviously when a dog sees food, they're going to satiate. They're going to start satiating, and you pair a neutral stimulus, you're not going to get a conditioned response. But this neutral stimulus, when you compare this neutral stimulus with this unconditioned response, or this unconditioned stimulus, it's going to cause the dog to have that unconditioned response. And the dog is going to finally associate that that neutral stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus, which is going to turn the bell into a conditioned stimulus, and it's going to turn the dog satiating or salivating to have this conditioned response. I confused satiating and salivating. My bad, guys. So John B. Watson focused on behaviorism. John B. Watson was known as the father of psychology and behaviorism within psychology. He believed that objective analysis of the mind was impossible. So obviously he didn't think that you could objectively view the mind and the circuitry in the mind in like a neuroscientific perspective and look at a lot of the functions and a lot of the glands and a lot of the organs and a lot of the structures, or not organs, but a lot of the structures that are in our brain and a lot of cortex and lobes and stuff like that, obviously neuroscience stuff. And he thought you couldn't objectively look at that to see what was happening with people. He instead focused on observing the behavior and a way to bring the behavior under control. Today, behaviorism is used in a behavior and cognitive behavioral therapy. So in cognitive behavioral therapy, there's a lot of these behavioral aspects and a lot of these like impure, I want to call it, a lot of these impure, erroneous aspects of people's beliefs and thoughts, which made them end up thinking in such a bad way to the point where they would drive themselves down unintentionally. So if you're going to say a lot of bad things like, oh, I'm terrible at this, you're going to like globalize, say, oh, I'm going to do this my whole life, I was never good at this, you're going to have that, maybe you have like some, maybe you have no locus of control, you feel like you have no locus of control, which no locus of control is not being able to control your emotions, or not being able to control actions and what happens in your environment and a lot of external things, and not being able to control your own life really at all. While locus of control thought that you could control your life, obviously, but we're not talking about that right now. But anyways, in cognitive behavioral therapy, we're just getting rid of a lot of those impure things and a lot of those impure repetitive thoughts that we have. But yeah, and this is the person I was talking about, John B. Watson, which, like I was saying, was a person that actually thought that, when you were born, you could shape someone's behavior and shape how they would think and shape what career they would get. So you could cause some baby or guide a baby to become a lawyer if you really wanted to, in the behavior perspective. So B.F. Skinner was this guy pretty much, he found out this thing called operant conditioning, which operant conditioning is in the same category as classical conditioning. They're not the same thing, but operant conditioning was mainly focused on reinforcements and punitive measures to give some sort of adaptation to an animal or to a person. So it studied the principles of modifying behavior through reinforcement and punishment. We saw major activities in driving behavior, which is operant conditioning. So I'll give you a little summary of this, but I will explain this in further chapters. Operant conditioning basically is when you see someone do a behavior and you give them a reward. So I'm going to reinforce them, give them a reward so they keep doing the positive behavior. I'm going to add something, and that can be a positive reinforcement by adding something, or maybe negative reinforcement if I take something away so somebody can do a good behavior. Maybe if I take the game away, the kid's going to focus on his homework more. Maybe if I give him some candy, the kid's going to do better on his work. Things like that. Or you could add a punitive measure, where like maybe in electroconvulsive therapy, actually, that we focus on. In electroconvulsive therapy, they add some punitive measure, like a shock. So it will reinforce that. It'll act as a punitive reinforcement, so the person won't do the things anymore, because they'll associate, or the substances anymore, because I can't say it on Roblox, but they won't do the substances anymore. So and then they'll associate this substance with the shock or with pain, so they don't do it again. Okay. So Maslow hierarchy of needs. We were talking about Maslow hierarchy of needs. It was a proposed human of needs. I didn't actually know it was going to pop up in this chapter, but like I was saying, the physiological things, like the natural physiological things on the bottom, such as food, water, shelter, and warmth. We're going to want to obtain these physiological things. Abraham Maslow thought that we're not going to be focusing on anything above anything on the bottom. So I wouldn't focus on security if I had no food, water, or warmth. I wouldn't focus on social life if I had no safety, employment, assets. This is what this is proposing. So Carl Rogers, which was a humanist, he developed a client-centered therapy. Like I was talking about earlier, it was a method that has been influential in clinical settings. So client-centered therapy involves patients taking a lead role in the therapy session. So Rogers believed that people are genuine, people are empathetic, people can control their own lives. Obviously, you can dictate a lot of the things that come in your life if you believe you have that locus of control. And he pretty much believed that, hey, you're the patient. Therapist is here to help you find out who you are and help you find out what's wrong with you. He's not going to tell you what's wrong with you. He doesn't know. You know yourself the best. That's pretty much how Roger thought. So the cognitive revolution by the 1950s, new disciplinary perspectives in linguistics, neuroscience, and computer science were emerging. The mind became the new focus of scientific inquiry. Noam Chomsky was a very influential in beginning the cognitive revolution. He believed psychology needed to incorporate mental functions into its focus in order to fully understand the human mind. So, yeah, obviously we needed a lot of psychology to understand how the human mind worked. That's how I just want to wrap that up. So, Margaret Floyd Washburn was the first woman to earn a doctorate in psychology. She researched on animal behavior and published an authoritative text on the subject. Contemporary psychology, branches of psychology. So, like I was saying earlier, biopsychology and evolutionary psychology, which is something we're most likely going to focus on in later chapters, like chapter 2. Sensation and perception. We're going to also focus on sensation and perception in later chapters and talk about the 5 senses. Cognitive psychology, we're going to speak on a lot of cognitive psychology. Like a lot of the false beliefs that people have, maybe the false ideation that people can have, and obviously the erroneous beliefs that can cause somebody to act in such a manner and that can impede a lot of the natural functions that people have. So developmental psychology, which is going to be focused on a lot of the stages that people go throughout life, such as like from what I can remember off the top of my head, generativity, things like that, your loneliness, integrity versus it's wide, but pretty much it's the Erik Erikson developmental stage theories, and it was pretty much discontinuous, which discontinuous is mainly stages, theories on how the mind is going to develop and the stages that people will reach once they develop to a certain age. Personality psychology, we'll get into a lot of personality psychology. Personality psychology deals with a lot of discovering who the person is, discovering what makes someone have a persona, and discovering a lot of the emotional regulations. And we're going to dive into disorders and things of the sort. We're going to also dive into social psychology, which social psychology is going to speak on a lot of the social things that goes on. There's actually a lot of social influence and conformity throughout nature that you'll see, and we'll observe that in social psychology. Same with and there's social loafing. You could get enticed from being around certain people, and you could have this sort of in-group bias. And it's pretty deep with social psychology. Health psychology, which also focuses on a lot of therapeutic measures, finding out to see if someone's healthy, finding out if there's something that impedes their life or is causing that occlusion or impairment. Industrial organizational psychology, which industrial psychology I actually didn't cover deeply, but this is focused on a lot of the industrial things that go on throughout that industry that can cause someone to lead to job burnout or cause someone to lead to exhaustion, depersonalization, derealization, and maybe even quitting. So sports and exercise psychology, which I actually didn't cover at all, I don't think. But I'd assume sports and exercise psychology focuses on a lot of the sublimation and a lot of the things that people who experience a lot of that not physical trauma, but the physical burden and a lot of then the psychological burden and the dependence and the anxiety and things like that. Clinical psychology, which is going to be focused on a lot of client-centered psychology and therapeutic psychology, and obviously forensic psychology, which is going to focus on a lot of criminality and a lot of the psychological things or psychological aspects that are focused on looking at someone's mind or finding, I don't know, forensic psychology is pretty broad. It's kind of hard to explain. It's hard to really explain forensic psychology. It's really broad from what I've learned. But yeah, we're going next to biopsychology. Biopsychology should be in the next chapter, which biological psychologists study the flow or study how the structure and function of the nervous system generates behavior. This research can conclude or include sensory and motor systems, which sensory and motor systems, sensory is going to be somatary, and motor is going to be a lot of that muscle contraction, the muscle movement, and things of the sort. Sleep, we're gonna focus on sleep in further chapters. Like you're gonna find out REM sleep, complexes, and things like that, K complexes and muscles. I mean, not muscle spindles, sleep spindles. Substance abuse, we're gonna find out a lot of substance abuse comorbidity with a lot of disorders with substance abuse, and how substance abuse can lead to coping mechanisms and addiction. Ingestive behavior, which how the ingestive system works, what motivates us to want to have this ingestive behaviors, and a lot of the homeostatic properties that come with this, and even addictions. So the reproductive behavior, there's actually something called postpartum depression, which is depression that can be developed from birth. Neurodevelopment, we're going to focus on a lot of the neurodevelopment. Like I said in development chapters, your neurons are going to be developing differently when you're a child, and when you get to adult, you're going to experience pruning, things of the sort, which pruning is pretty much just cutting off a lot of those neurological synaptic connections. Plasticity of the nervous system, which I actually don't know what that means. Plasticity of the nervous system, I'd assume that would be maybe the myelin sheaths that act as the insulators for the nervous system, that translate a lot of the action potentials of things of the sort. But don't take my word on that here. I will, actually I looked at it right now. Because I don't want to misinform anybody. What is digestive? No. Why am I saying what is digestive? What is nervous plasticity? My Google is really bad, so it sadly doesn't give me an AI breakdown. Neuroplasticity, we learn, absorb, and okay, so neuroplasticity. Oh wait, I literally know what that is. Oh no, the plasticity of the nervous system. Okay, that's what confused me. So neuroplasticity is simply adaptation and learning. That's all that is, but I don't know why it's said it like that. Biological correlates of psychological disorders. So a lot of the biological factors, such as insufficient neurotransmitters, or maybe over excitation with neurotransmitters, can relate to a lot of the psychological disorders that you're going to experience. We'll get into that more. It can be things like schizophrenia, ADHD, things of the sort, and we're going to talk about antipsychotics and psychotics. Well, I've already made chapters on that, so if you really want to see that, you can skip to chapter 15 or 16 and look at a lot of the therapeutic measures. So sensation and perception, this is going to be the area of study focused on both of physiological aspects of the sensory system and the psychological experiences of the sensory information. Sensation is sensory information, sight, sound, touch, and smell. Perception experiences the world, which is influenced by where we focus our attention on previous experiences or cultural background. So you can't have like an objective sensory perception, because it's going to be based on, or it's going to be conflated with a lot of your cultural backgrounds. So you could perceive something differently than how someone else could. Developmental psychology. So developmental psychology studies the physical and mental attributes of aging and maturation, which Erik Erikson and Jean Piaget had a lot of good theories on developmental psychology in continuous and discontinuous stages of psychology. But this can include various skills that are acquired throughout growth, moral reasoning, cognitive skills, social skills. Obviously, with more reasoning, we're going to develop our frontal cortex, and we're going to be able to judge things in a more accurate manner, and we're going to have better cognitive skills, better cognitive aspects of our being to move or to operate or to think in a better manner when we get older. And a lot of the social skills that we're going to understand as we go through. Yeah, I'm done. No, nothing's in the washer. But yeah, social skills. So you're gonna obviously develop a lot of social skills because you're gonna realize and perceive a lot of things that you're gonna go through. And yeah. Okay. You're gonna go through a lot of social things. So Jean Piaget is famous for his theories regarding changes in cognitive ability that occurs as you move from infancy to childhood to adulthood. So personality psychology. Personality psychology also has. See, I even forget, and we're gonna have a chapter on memory too. So this was a mnemonic called OCEAN, which stood for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. This focused on behaviors and thoughts and patterns that are unique to each individual with studies in the field that includes consciousness and unconsciousness thinking and identifying personal traits. The five-factor model, which is pretty much a five-factor OCEAN model that provides a description that would describe someone who scored highly on that given dimension, and someone with a lower score on a dimension can be described in opposite terms. So if you're openness, you're going to be described as imaginative feelings, actions, and identities. Consciousness, you're going to be competent. You're going to be self-disciplined, thoughtful, virtuous, ethical. Extroversion, we know this. Sociability, you're going to be open. You're going to be emotionally expressed. Pretty much you're going to be like the term says, open book. Agreeableness, you're going to be able to agree with a lot of things. You're probably going to be open-minded if you're agreeable, obviously. You're going to be trustworthy, and you're going to be good, matured. Neuroticism, which is a tendency to have a lot of unstable emotions, and a lot of the emotions we think of as negative, which are anxiety, depression, and things of that sort. A lot of the negative or sadness, those emotions that can impair us heavily, or that are just overall bad. So social psychology is how individuals interact and relate. So attraction, prejudice, interpersonal conflicts, and obedience. So we're also going to focus on, I forgot to mention, we're going to focus on a lot of authority within social conflicts, and how someone could obey or look at someone, and a lot of the social roles that are also in society with social psychology. We're going to look at a lot of the interpersonal conflicts, which is the conflicts between between different people. We're going to look at what attracts another person to a person. We're going to also look at prejudice within social psychology. So we're going to have in-group biases, which is going to be really prejudice. So health psychology focuses on biological, social, and psychological. This branch is the branch that focuses on the individual's health and is directly related or affected by the biological or psychological and social cultural influences, which we actually phrase the socioculture and the biological things as a diathesis model, which conflates sociocultural and biological aspects in the diathesis model. So the psychosocial model suggests that health and illness is determined by the interaction of these three factors. So clinical psychology focuses on diagnosis and treating psychological disorders and problematic patterns of behaviors. This studies involves clinical therapy and counseling. So like I was saying earlier, clinical psychology is going to focus on maybe CBT. There's a lot of different therapies. There's going to be things like CBT. It's hard to explain, but there's therapies and therapies. There's like humanistic therapy. There's going to be the cognitive behavioral therapy, like I said earlier, like I said again. There's going to be psychoanalytical therapy, which, like we discussed, is going to focus more on the bygones, more on the past things that happened in your life and what shaped you, what happened in your childhood, and maybe even dream analysis. Which I don't know if we do dream analysis today. I don't think we do. Or electroconvulsive therapy, which is more of a biomedical therapy. That's when it really gets bad. And another thing with biomedical therapies, there can be a lot of using substances if something gets really bad to the point where it's not really, I won't say it's not fixable, but it just be better for the client, because it's always based on the client's perception. If he feels like therapy isn't working for him and maybe they want to use a substance, they could use a substance that could help. It's always based on the client when it comes to substances. So, so cognitive behavior therapists, take cognitive process behaviors into account when providing psychotherapy. This is one of the subtle strategies that may be used to practice for clinical psychologists. So, industrial organization, it's a branch of psychology that applies psychological theories, principles, and research industries and organizational settings. So this can also be like settings. I didn't even think of that. There's a lot that goes into industrial psychology, but my school just didn't want me to cover that chapter, which was chapter 14 on industrial psychology, which I'll cover. I will cover industrial psychology if I can get a slideshow. I'll try to cover it. But this involves issues related to personal management, organization structure, and the workplace environment. So obviously, if you feel like your workplace environment is overcrowded, if you feel like your workplace environment is dirty, you're most likely going to try to circumvent, or you're going to view your workplace as repugnant or grotesque, and it's going to entice you not to want to work there. If you think your environment is nasty and dirty, or you think it's crowded, or you think it's full of a lot of these people who are cynical in a way. You have this cynical perception of people, which that means you think that a lot of people are just do things based off what they want, and everyone's like a narcissist, basically. So, sports and exercise psychology, which focuses on the psychological aspects regarding sports and the physical performance. It studies motivation, performance, anxiety, and general mental well-being, like I said earlier, motivation and anxiety. And it's going to focus on performance as well, which is going to have something, or which is going to deal with your physical abilities. So forensic psychology, which is a branch of psychology dealing with the justice system. The task of forensic psychologists include assessment of individuals' mental competency to stand in trial, sentencing and treatment, suggests an advisement regarding eyewitness testimonies. So the field of psychology requires a strong understanding of the legal system. So you have to understand the legal system, and you also have to understand the disorder and maybe the therapeutic and the psychological systems for being a forensic psychologist. Which actually this reminds me of the I don't know what her name was, but she was an attorney for the Joker in the second Joker movie. But I'm not sure what her name was, but that's what that really reminds me of. So careers in psychology, there's a lot of careers in psychology. Most careers in psychology require a PhD or a master's degree. I do not know a lot about the psychological careers, I'm not going to lie. So you probably want to go to a different psychological video if you want to learn more about the psychological options. But this slideshow does say teaching, research, clinical psychologist, counseling psychologist, social work, corporate and marketing jobs, which I know corporate and marketing jobs can deal heavily with psychology. If you can understand how the human mind works, you're going to be really good, and you're going to be really efficacious when it comes to doing a lot of the financial and a lot of the corporate or marketing jobs. So counseling psychology, obviously I know what that is. We're going to be helping a lot. It's more group and family therapy when it comes to counseling psychology or social work, which you're pretty much going to be looking at therapeutic measures, mostly focusing on how the mind works, and maybe focusing on what happens in the brain. So, like we said, the functionality of the brain. What drives someone to do something? What drives someone for the homeostasis? What drives someone for that primary motivation? Clinical psychologist was going to be a lot of the substance psychologists, the people who are going to give you the substances, like antipsychotics and things of that, atypical antipsychotics, things like that. Teaching, which, yeah, you can be a teacher. I think I heard you need a PhD. It's better to have a PhD in teaching or being a lecturer rather than having a master's. And you can also just do research in psychology, which you just research psychology and find new aspects of the brain that maybe some people didn't know. Employment in different sectors. So the percent of the 2009 psychology doctorates employed in this sector were 26% were in university, 25% were in a hospital, 16% were in the government medical center, 10% were in business or nonprofit, 8% were in other educational institutions, 9% or 6% were in medical school, and 6% were also in independent practices. So job opportunities, top occupational employment graduates with a BA or bachelor's degree in psychology. As you can see, these are the occupations that you are going to receive if you have a BA in psychology. Yeah, and I think that will, yeah, but just in case you're listening, mid and top level management, sales, social work, other management positions, human resources, other administrative positions, insurance, real estate, business, marketing, and sales, healthcare, which is nurse, pharmacist, or therapist, and finance, which is accounting and auditor. And yep, that will be it for chapter 1. Chapter 1 is pretty short, probably one of the most shortest chapters I've ever done, honestly. Only 40-minute video, but yeah, hope y'all enjoyed. Thank you.